Winter Olympics are over, and our neighbour to the north, Norway, won the most medals, both gold medals and medals in all. Impressive for a country of just over 5 million people. It got me thinking about the whole of Scandinavia, how people outside of Scandinavia often think of us as one entity, consisting of smaller tribes, Swedes, Norwegians and Danes. And I wanted to give you my take on us, on Scandinavia. Just a brief version, because you could do a 3-hour-long documentary or a whole series. Well, I'm taking you through Kerteminde, the old part of town, or part of the old part of town, simply because it's a nice little street to drive through on our way to the woods. You've been here before if you've seen some of my videos, probably. I tend to go here quite often because it's nearby and it's close to the sea, and it's a smaller town than where I live, and I quite like that. When I use the word Scandinavia here, I use it the way we do in Scandinavia, where it includes Norway, Sweden and Denmark. When we use the word Norden, or the Nordic countries, it also includes Finland, Iceland, the Faroe Islands and Greenland. So we're leaving Kerteminde now, and thankfully this car is turning left and we're turning right. This is the famous Daisy route that I have taken you on before. Maybe you've seen that. Daisy route, or Marguerite-route in Denmark, is a particularly scenic route. Of course, it's not perhaps all that scenic right now. Here you can see how much it's rained the past few days, or many days. Many fields have been flooded. Many parking lots, playgrounds, etc., gardens have been flooded. Apparently the word Scandinavia was first used here in the 1700s, but was already mentioned by the Roman Plinius in about 77 AD. We rooted for the Norwegians and Swedes in the various competitions that we managed to see in the Winter Olympics, notably in the cross-country skiing, which to me is the most awesome of the disciplines, and we always have. When I was a student, I remember camping out in front of the TV when the Winter Olympics took place in a different time zone, cheering wildly when the legendary Norwegian Bjørn Dane took medal after medal. And when I say we cheered, I mean me and my family, but also the Danish commentators. I was watching a snowboard competition in the recent Olympics where there was a particularly excellent Danish commentator, Peter Falktoft, who's both knowledgeable and has a wicked sense of humor. One or two Swedes and Norwegians were lining up, and he began cheering for them, saying that yes, most Danes cheer for our Scandinavian brethren, as we somewhat sentimentally sometimes like to refer to them, because we kind of feel they represent us too. Then they can cheer for us when it comes to football, he added, which about sums up our different priorities and skills in the world of sports. The reason they have such good skiers is of course partly due to their landscape and the weather they have. They have huge mountains and lots of snow in the winter, and are more or less born with skis on their feet, which we very much are not here in Denmark. We grew up with bike pedals under our feet because our country is small and a lot more flat. Not quite as flat as Holland, but we emphatically do not have mountains. This is why it's so laughable that we call our highest hill Himmelbjerget, which means the sky mountain. It would never be considered a mountain outside of Denmark, and mostly it isn't even within the Danish borders. But we do have hills, and we're the country with the second longest coastline per square kilometers, almost an island kingdom. The sizes of our three countries are vastly different too. Norway and Sweden are huge compared to Denmark, with Norway being over 7 times larger and Sweden 10 times larger. Given that the Danish and the Norwegian populations are about the same at 5.6 and 5.1 million respectively, and with the Swedes coming in at just under 10 million, this means that you can live out in the middle of nowhere much more easily in Norway and Sweden than in Denmark. This is something that I'm deeply envious of, but I try to console myself with the fact that it's not as crowded here as in Holland, where there are 3 times as many people as in Denmark, in an area that's slightly smaller. Geographically and possibly culturally, Denmark is closer to the rest of the European continent than Norway and Sweden. Where I live is almost equidistant from Sweden and Germany, which is somehow telling. Denmark is part of Scandinavia, but is also similar to Holland in many ways. Culturally, Swedes and Norwegians typically think of Danes as cooler, more happening, especially Copenhagen, possibly because we're closer to the continent of Europe. We, on the other hand, are impressed with their landscapes and prowess when it comes to skiing. Our languages are closely related, but Swedes and Norwegians have a hard time understanding us Danes when we speak, and vice versa, whereas their pronunciation sounds similar. On the other hand, it's easy to read, especially Norwegian if you're Dane. In the Viking Age, we all spoke the Norse language up in these parts, which does not mean Norwegian, but Scandinavian. So there's one other person here on the beach beside me, but it's just one man who's fishing. I kind of like that. We're two people alone. And I wanted to take you here today because the light is amazing. It's that grey, bluish light that I think of when I think of Scandinavia, maybe especially Denmark. Although in Norway and Sweden it would be the color of the snow. Here, alas, it's the color of a clouded sky and the sea. Interestingly, Ragnar Lothbrok in the series Vikings is considered Norwegian on the show, but was most likely a Dane, and two of his sons, Ivar and Vitsøk, are played by Danish actors. Conversely, many of the actors portraying Danish Vikings in the show The Last Kingdom are played by Norwegians. It seems that to outsiders, a Viking is a Viking. After the Viking Age, from 1397 to 1523, that is for 126 years, the three countries were one within the Kalmar Union under Queen Margaret I, who was Danish, but queen of all three countries. The movie Margrethe den Første, or Margaret I, which came out in 2021, brought it home to me how the three nations have had very close ties for centuries. Historically and politically, they've either been part of the same nation, or later, when they were separate nations, often seemed to have each other's backs when something happened in the world. Even if it's not something we think about in our daily lives, and despite our many differences, there is that small sense of brotherhood between our three countries. It's getting a little chilly here now, even though I dared to take off my coat for a while and just sit in my sweater. That's deceptive, because it's actually only about 2 or 3 degrees Celsius. But it's nice and quiet here. There's no wind for once, which is the first time in about a week. So this is lovely. After a visit to Sweden in 1839, Hans Christian Andersen suddenly understood how closely related our three peoples are, and proclaimed himself a Scandinavian. If I were to mention a few other things that we all have in common, it would be that we're peaceful and pretty easygoing, that we like being outdoors, and that we're all quite dedicated to hygge. As you may know if you've seen some of my recent videos, I've recently embraced knitting again, and I've found so many knitters on social media, many of them from Norway and Denmark, also Sweden and Germany, the UK, and occasionally other countries. But in Europe it's clearly, and perhaps obviously, a Northern European tradition. I'm currently knitting a sweater based on a Norwegian knitting pattern, and it's interesting how I can understand about 90 to 95% of it. And then suddenly there'll be a word that's completely different, like genser, which means trøje in Danish, or sweater. Then I read in a book on Aran knitting that there is such a thing as a traditional Scottish gansey style, a word that clearly sounds very similar to genser. At the risk of disappointing someone, I will conclude by saying that we do not have northern lights in Denmark, nor in the southern part of Sweden. We don't quite have midnight sun either, although the sun sets at around 10 p.m. in the summer and rises again at around 5 a.m. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to having you back here again. Thank you so much for watching.